Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 8:30 Live. Oh, YouTube kicked in a second late. I said hello. This was going to, there wasn't that much news. I was going to have a nice, chill fireside chat, see who showed up, have an easy discussion. But somebody wanted to talk about the militias, the Boogaloo, which is the Civil War II or Race War I. And, I have mentioned several times that one of these days we'll get into QAnon and what fuels all these conspiracy theories. And so I figure with not too much going on in the news, I'll just recount what I know. And you'd be surprised how much I know about this because I studied martial arts for a pretty decent amount of time with somebody who turned out to be very much into this, like a real booster of the QAnon 3% sort of perspective on the world. And you might know him if you are friends with me on Facebook because he used to come and comment on absolutely everything. Yeah, race war. We're getting into it. So my knowledge of the deep inner workings or theories of QAnon and some of these militia groups are really more than you might think for somebody who is known for sort of being on the left. So I guess let's just get into it. So this is all sort of kicked off. And listen, I'm happy to have other folks weigh in on this because there's a lot to piece together and I certainly don't know everything. But again, more than you might think. So this all got kicked off by an article today that was in the HuffPost entitled, "Amid the Pandemic, U.S. Militia Groups Plot the Boogaloo, aka Civil War on Facebook." Now first, the Boogaloo refers to Breaking, Electric Boogaloo 2, and simply the idea that Boogaloo is a reference to anything that's got a sequel. So for them, it's Boogaloo, the sequel to the Revolution, the sequel to the American Civil War. Independently from this, there are all sorts of militias that have sprung up, like 3%, which is the largest militia, that are looking to sort of rehash the Revolutionary War. And regardless of whether you're a rehasher of the Civil War or a rehasher of the Revolutionary War, the perspective is largely the same in that the United States government is controlled by people who don't respect the rights of the people, and it's got to go. The Civil War II Boogaloo is more overtly about race. James says break into Electric Boogaloo is a classic. Yes, and when we have Civil War Boogaloo, it'll also be a classic. But while Boogaloo is significantly more overtly about race, the militia movement is much more much better controlled in its messaging. Now, to talk just for a second about the 3% movement, which is the largest militia and has thousands or tens of thousands of members across the country. These are folks who actually, they promote Second Amendment and they train regularly in their little militia groups in operational exercises, sort of like in the woods. And the 3% name derives from it's not a theory, nor is it correct, but belief that only 3% of colonists participated in the American Revolution, and that it's this small minority of people that are going to overthrow a tyrannical government. Now, whether or not only 3% of colonists participated in the American Revolution, and that's not true, but even if that were the case, far more Americans participated in the American Civil War. And all of this is just to say that when you're fighting a foreign power across the Atlantic Ocean in the 1700s, maybe you don't need that many people involved. But when you're talking about overthrowing a government that's next door and is democratically elected and has legitimacy amongst your neighbors, you're going to see much more of the population engaged. So the first thing I would say about the whole Boogaloo militia movement, Revolutionary War, Civil War redux phenomenon is, while it is true that they have been training and gathering up weaponry for years and years, after all, the per capita of the United States is something like 100 guns to one per person, and only like a small fraction of the U.S. actually has purchased guns, which means that it's more like 500 guns per person, something like that. Even given that, conquering and holding territory is almost impossible, regardless of the regardless of your armament. And this is something that's been shown just over and over again through military history. So I don't know what these people think their overall strategy is. They might be able to fend off an invading force for a time, but it's not like the 3% could come and invade New York and hold this territory if the 8 million people who lived here didn't want them. Even if we had no guns, it is super duper difficult to conquer and hold territory against the population's will. However, that's not what this is about. That's not why this is important. The reason this is important is they still have the ability to kill lots and lots of people. That is because they have automatic rifles and they trade tips on how to build explosives and do other terroristy things. In fact, just the other day, I think it was last Thursday, the FBI classified its first white extremist group as a terrorist organization. So this is definitely something that's been picking up. It is something that after a long time of ignoring it, the FBI has not stopped ignoring because they could be doing a lot more about it. And in fact, there was, back when Barack Obama was president, there was a task force for this that obviously Trump disbanded. But even after, even having had their task force looking into white nationalism disbanded, they've just labeled their first terrorist group. So what's fueling all of this? Well, you can start with the fact that, yeah, Barack Obama was president, and that seemed to piss off a lot of people. But even beyond this are the really complex theories of how the United States government has been captured by the deep state and evil interests. And mind you, at least for the QAnon folks, they really do believe that the folks who are in power are evil, like pure evil, like demons and devils, and have a supernatural evilness to them. And I go back and forth as to whether or not the things they talk about are in fact supernatural, or whether they're ascribing supernatural qualities to things which are mundane, but also are bad. So, for example, the QAnon conspiracy theory really revolves around the idea that there's a cabal of elite in the United States and the world that are running the show. And their goal, beyond power, because they already have power, their goal is, yes, to maintain that power, but really to prey upon everybody else. And they derive pleasure, satisfaction, sustenance from the oppression and displeasure of the people that they control. And this ties into the whole Pizzagate thing and revolves largely around this thing called adrenochrome. Now, if you've never heard of adrenochrome, that's fine, because from what I can tell, it's not quite real. And I don't know whether it's real or not, but looking it up, it doesn't seem to be anything that is traceable back to real science. Now, just to remind you, the way I know all this is it comes through somebody that I've known for a while, who tried for some time to convince me to join the Q Army. Anyway, this is what they tell you. So adrenochrome is a drug that's used by elite. It's derived from adrenaline, which you can sort of get from the root, the Latin root, or Greek root, I guess, adrenaline. And the way that you get adrenochrome is from living human beings. And the best way to get it is to get it from children. And you have to terrorize them beforehand. It's the fight or flight instinct that triggers the production of adrenaline. And then if you terrorize these children, you can literally drink their blood and get a high from the adrenochrome that's produced in their system. Again, not sure that adrenochrome is a real thing. Do know that adrenaline is a real thing, but adrenochrome is supposed to be like the best drug in the world. And it's not clear to me why it's so good. It's either a very powerful psychedelic, or it makes you immortal, or both. Either way, this is where the Pizzagate phenomenon comes from. The pedophile rings that they're absolutely obsessed with are all about people like Hillary Clinton and other folks in power, Barack Obama, the Pope. All of these folks are a single cabal. No, sorry, they are not a single cabal. That's going to be important in a second. Are groups of elites who prey upon children to extract this adrenochrome. It's real. Okay, adrenochrome is apparently real, but they prey upon children. And so the Pizzagate was about this pedophile ring, which had a base under a pizza parlor in Washington, D.C. Mind you, that pizza parlor did not have a basement, but that's where they were keeping the kids. The whole, the USS Comfort that was sent to New York to help with the coronavirus cases, the theory was that that ship was actually filled with children, which were being funneled or shuffled from a holding pen to a location in New York, and was also picking up children. And they were circulating pictures of the inside of the USS Comfort that just had cages and cages of young children. Again, to be sexually preyed on to release the adrenochrome so that the elite could make use of it. And this was really bolstered by the Jeffrey Epstein situation, because it really helped to solidify the idea that there is this massive conspiracy to prey upon children. Now, there are lots of terrible people in the world with deep sicknesses, and these pedophiles who do prey upon children are one of them, but I think it's a bit of a stretch to go and say that it's a group of elite that are doing it to get adrenochrome because it's a good psychedelic, or maybe it makes you immortal. But James King, who's been commenting a bit, also has insight into this because he does research into these sorts of things. And he's got some, I just want to read his comments before then talking about the war between the elites that's going on and the way that it's fueled their allegiance to Donald Trump. Because now that you've got this backstory as to the conspiracy that's going on, now we can start talking about why Donald Trump is a solution to that and the necessity in these folks' mind for a civil war. So James says, I've studied these groups and tactics for certain factors. There's a strong cleavage inside these organizations between operational policy, these are the militias, and the, quote, for rules, boogaloo theorizing. Most of it predicates on the complete dissolution of the DoD, Department of Defense, and this idea that big parts of the military will join them and provide all the missing logistical and tactical structure they lack. So we were talking before about how it's basically all these militia groups exist and they fantasize about this second Revolutionary War, second Civil War, but it's in their numbers. Even if they had huge numbers, it's almost impossible to capture and hold territory and suppress a population. So he's saying that a lot of their theories are predicated on the idea that the U.S. military will actually collapse when there's an uprising, and that many of the people in that military will come join them, lending the logistical and material support of U.S. forces to these scrappy militias. This is not necessarily ridiculous, considering all of the reporting that has already been clear about the infiltration of U.S. and U.S. armed forces and law enforcement departments by white nationalists. So James goes on, their job is to get ready mentally, physically, etc., for that to go down. And they've got a lot of ex-military guys who are basically bored and misquote the life, and they are super racist. So adrenochrome now, moving from that discussion about the militia to this QAnon sort of conspiracy theory that drives a lot of this anti-government activism and love of Trump, which we're about to get into. But talking about adrenochrome, which is this drug which fuels this elite cabal, on which drives them to do completely evil things like terrorize children and run pedophilia rings to extract this adrenochrome from their bodies. It was used as an antipsychotic, adrenochrome. People used to think an excess of it caused schizophrenia, but that was basically debunked in the 70s. He wrote, and I'm going to say, sometimes I miss comments in here, like they just don't show up. He wrote a wild scene in Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. This would be Hunter Thompson, involving adrenochrome that was totally made up and over-exaggerated. A lot of Q people love Hunter S. Thompson and the story of its effects, again, adrenochrome, which is totally overstated as like mescaline. If you've ever seen or read Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, you get the reference. Okay, so it is in fact a real thing, and it's in theory, massively powerful psychotic, although apparently maybe not so massively powerful as the QAnon folks like to think. All right, here's where things really get interesting. So, and mind you, not every person who is, quote, red-pilled believes this particular conspiracy theory. The red pill it's a reference to the Matrix. You take the blue pill, you stay asleep. You take the red pill, you wake up. Red-pill conservatives are the ones who see the world for what it is. They're the ones who, recognize that women oppress men and that minorities have it better than white folk. All these things, and that there is white genocide going on. So these are your sort of red-pilled people. All right, if you're red-pilled, then you might subscribe to this QAnon conspiracy theory. Whether you do or not, you certainly believe in the deep state. And the deep state is sort of the professional bureaucracy of the U.S. government. And it's the folks who manage most of the levers, not necessarily of power, but of action. And in this regard, the deep state is a real thing. So there are accountants and bureaucrats and paper pushers and people who make things go. And the theory is that the deep state has its own agenda. How you get hundreds of thousands of federal and state bureaucrats to all follow a singular agenda is beyond me. But the idea is that the deep state does have its own agenda. Now, it's not a monolith. It's all fractured, and it used to be considered a monolith, but really now it's like the CIA versus the FBI versus the military. Although the CIA and FBI are now on the same page because they hate Trump, but it used to be that they were at odds about Trump until everybody realized that the FBI was infiltrated because of Strzok and Page and Mueller. All right. In any event, you've got all of these civil servants, if you will, who are not responsive to the elected leaders per se because they have job security and tenure or whatever, however you want to look at it. They have their unions that keep them in their jobs. All these folks can't really be fired easily by the president or other executive officers, right? So if they don't like you, they just sort of get in your way. Or at worst, they actively move against you. So for example, this is like if you work in a job and the person responsible for conveying your message to the boss doesn't like you, your message doesn't get there, right? So this is the idea that if the pencil pushers in the CIA or the analysts in the CIA don't like what the president thinks, they just make up bunk intel or they don't execute on their orders. And it just seems to be that the president is always wrong or that their agenda is always stifled. That's how the deep state in theory works. There are also leaders in the deep state, like the heads of these departments and agencies, and those folks might actively be organizing, for example, a coup. Now, in the United States, this has never happened, but certainly in other countries, you can have a situation where the, quote, deep state, which is to say other elites who have allegiance of officers in the secret police or in the Defense Department or in the military, they will stage coups to remove sitting leaders. Never happened in the United States. In any event, the theory goes that the FBI and CIA are against Trump. The military, however, is pro-Trump. And how did we get here? Because of the adrenochrome situation and how all the elite are actively terrible, Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, the Pope, all these people are in on these rings of truly evil activity, and they're all fighting each other for a limited supply of adrenochrome, mind you. The deep state was forced to take sides. And ultimately, the military was the faction of the deep state that was looking for a way to end the corruption, to end this system. So the military backed Donald Trump. And the way it did this was with a massive psyop. And if you're unfamiliar with the concept of psyop, it's a psychological operation. I don't know, think Russian propaganda. So the US military launches a massive psyop against the American public to get Trump elected. Mind you, the QAnon thing is in itself a psyop. Their belief is that all the information they're being fed is being fed to them by the US military to strengthen their movement. And that the QAnon movement itself, again, is a psyop conducted by the US military to slowly trickle out information about how the Trump administration is going to be cracking down on these massive pedophile rings. This leads to some pretty scary conclusions. Even if you believe that, like, that these massive rings were a real thing and a problem, the conclusions that the conspiracy theorists draw as to how this should be dealt with are pretty out there. First and foremost, their theory is that there's going to be a very large crackdown that results in military court trials for a bunch of civilians that will be conducted in secret and lead to massive executions. Now, I just want to sort of explain why this is so terrifying. Everybody who follows these conspiracy theories is basically being ginned up, and this is QAnon and others, but they're all basically ginned up by this idea that a massive purge of US leadership without trial is a good thing. That if the government comes for people and starts eliminating them, that we should go along with it because it's all part of the plan. This plan is not revealed to anybody, but instead trickled out slowly through breadcrumbs that only the most intelligent people can follow by deep state operatives who have to conceal their identity, hence the Q anonymous. Again, it's a big play by the military to slowly awaken the US public. But again, the conclusion here is that we've set up a situation where there are a significant, I don't know about a significant actually, but there are a fervent group of people who believe that there are these deep state conspiracies that are being undertaken to eliminate these elite cabals that are all fighting over this drug adrenochrome, which they extract from terrorized and abused children. and that the plan for doing this is to effectively round them up and shoot them through extrajudicial means. Anybody who subscribes to this theory then is looking forward to the day that Trump, quote, unseals the documents. There's going to be a great unsealing of documents. Unseals the documents, proving that all of his political enemies are actually monsters, and announcing that they have been summarily executed. Now, if that doesn't sound chilling, I don't know what does. So a lot of these are the same folks who are gearing up for this civil war. And these are more the Boogaloo people than they are the 3%ers. Because one, the 3%ers preceded Trump. This was a militia movement that started sort of during Obama, after the Bundy family, or really during and around the Bundy family stuff. Oh, wait, was that George Bush? Man, this has been going on for a while. Anyway, they've been growing their numbers steadily. But if you remember the Bundys, they were the folks who sort of locked themselves in their house when the federal government came to collect taxes for grazing on federal land, and they shot at tax collectors. And then his sons went to another place out in like Washington and tried to take over a federal land reserve. Anyway, nothing really happened to those folks. I don't think they went to jail. Well, they went to jail after they took control of this federal reserve. But like that has been going on for a while. This new movement, the Boogaloo stuff, has really come up with Trump, who has been openly supportive and provided comfort to these sorts of theories. Now, there have been some comments, so we're going to go back and read them because some of these folks are also pretty, I don't know, learned in this subject. They've studied them and what have you, and that's what they do. So James says, last thing on adrenochrome, it's not a scheduled drug, so you can just buy it as a supplement if you want. Oh, is that a fact? Some of those, quote, brain drugs that get marketed on weird alt-right platforms like InfoWars or Joe Rogan include it as an inactive ingredient. Really? As far as anyone knows, just taking it straight probably has a very limited effect. You might feel a little more focused than usual. I'm not a medical doctor, but my understanding is that unless you've got a defective gene for producing it naturally in your body, your body will neutralize it after a certain dosage. Now, I couldn't say. All I know is that there's a huge conspiracy theory that you want the concentrated stuff that is in, quote, red wine, which again is children's blood, after you've terrorized them. Pretty sick stuff, and leads to even sicker things, like people going to pizza shops with guns and almost killing people because they think in the basement is a pedophile ring when there is no basement in the pizza shop. Julianne Ballington says, all of these people who are supposed to be in cahoots don't even get along publicly. How are they supposed to get along doing all of these things? Well, that's pretty easy to answer, and it is that not getting along publicly is the conspiracy. Don't you understand? Anything that you can point to that would say this just proves it is only proof that they're covering their tracks. So the answer to your question is, if they can't get along publicly, how do they get along privately? The public facade is a lie, and privately they are working to control the supply of this drug and to feed off of the life energy of others. Now, this can, and for some people does, bleed into the lizard people, Greys, and other conspiracy theories. But we're not going to go that far today because it's getting late, and I've had a really fun time recounting all of this. And if you have any questions, let me know. But just because. James King, your brain actually produces very little of it, adrenochrome, even when you're freaking out, and it would basically be impossible to, quote, farm it from humans. This kind of breaks the Q theory because it's just a chemical. Factories in China can pump in far greater volume and far more, quote, pure than anything you'd get from living tissue. Okay, well, maybe you're in on the conspiracy, James. I don't know, man. Have you tried telling them that? So it's yet another way in which the theoretical planks of the conspiracy actually make no sense, even following their own internal logic. Yeah. Yeah. Julianne, OMG. I was thinking about who started all of this. Then it dawned on me. It's Tyler Durden. It's like Fight Club has met V for Vendetta. These people think they are V, but really they are just messed up person going through an intense midlife crisis. Well, I don't know about midlife crisis. You've got a lot of these young incel types, the black pills. Well, black pill is a particular type of incel, but you know, they all do think that they're V. I don't know if I'd say that they're all like Tyler Durden. They're not quite that smart. James, as a fellow lizard person, I'm offended by all of this. Yes, I, as a lizard person for sure, because I am Jewish, am also offended that they figured out what we're up to. But, we'll have to find something else, eh, James? Okay, so that's sort of... So that's the QAnon side of things. There is, of course, just the explicitly race-driven component, which is the idea of the white genocide. And this all revolves around the idea that white people are being displaced as the majority population, and they are terrified of being a minority. I wonder why. I wonder what would make them think that being a minority in the United States of America is absolutely terrible. I can't put my finger on it, but they believe that the immigration policies produced by the Democrats are really an effort to A, flood the country with people who cannot, or at least should not, be voting in the United States, and B, to undertake a breeding effort to create mixed blood children, or to simply create non-white children that will eventually outsize the white population. And this is the white genocide project. I am obviously a very important part of this as somebody who is mixed white and Asian, but they would probably discount it because I am also Jewish, and my mother, though white, is from Poland, which is not the cool kind of white. It's Slavic or Eastern European, and nowhere near as desirable as, say, the Anglos or the Germans, right? But, that is one of the things that's driving these fringe Boogaloo movements. And they use the language of the Constitution and the Second Amendment sort of as cover. But I think it's very clear, certainly to the folks who would watch a live like this from me, that, this is just cover for their desire to impose their values or their ideals on other. They're not really there to prop up things like freedom of speech or freedom of search and seizure. All of these amendments that we have and these ideas of equality, they're there to preserve what they view as an ideal society, which is one which gives their positions primacy. And they rely heavily on the Second Amendment to create a threat of force so that people will take them seriously. It is actually terrorism. Of course, then they also vote in massive numbers in Republican states in primaries to get rabid conservatives elected to office. So they've really got everything going for them. And I'd like to take this moment to remind folks that you should also be voting in all of your political primaries, whether or not you think there's a great candidate involved, because it's those primaries that shape the parties. And look, if you don't like the person who's running in the primary, do what the right-wing conservatives did. Run your own freaking person. Petition, get them on the ballot, scare your local electeds to the right, or rather, scare your local electeds to the left, or whichever way you want, and change the Overton window. The Overton window being the theoretical laundry list of policies that are acceptable. Right now, the Overton window is very right, because a lot of right-wing lunatics have been pushing their policies and making us consider them in a real way. Bernie Sanders, for example, pushed it left by making Healthcare, universal healthcare, something we have to talk about on a regular basis and seriously consider. Donald Trump isn't in office because he came out of nowhere. He's in office because the Tea Party ran a bunch of really local people for really local office, like school board, water board, and Republican county chairs. Voting in force in these very local elections, they created a bunch of people who got some level of name recognition in their districts. That allowed them to run a bunch of people for Congress. And as it turns out, if you run a lot of people for Congress in a country as large as the United States, some of them are going to win, like Michelle Bachmann and that other crazy guy whose name I can't remember. Now, whatever you want to say about these crazy people, they won. They scared the living daylights out of every incumbent Republican because nobody wants to lose their cush seat in Congress. And so Republicans started appeasing the Tea Party. And every time a more militant right-wing group came forward and participated in the election, the Republicans marched in lockstep towards that group. And we simply don't have anything like that on the left. Instead of people engaging forcefully, we have folks just being like, I'm not going to engage at all if I don't get what I want the first time around. I just want to say that, like, I support Bernie Sanders. I was a delegate for him in 2016. I supported Warren in 2020. Picking up your ball and going home just isn't the right way to, like, that's not how you can build power on the left. And the reason for this is pretty straightforward. I'm just going to say it once tonight. And that is, the left is too reliable of a block for the Democrats to actually defect. Because so much of the left will not defect, it is not a swing vote for the Democrats to pick up. It is a base vote that either allows them to win or not. But refusing to vote on the left doesn't deprive the Democrats of anything they think that they can't get or that they need to get. They're trying to pick up swing votes. Now, you might ask, what is the point of being on the left then, if you are taken for granted in that way? The point of being on the left is that as a base constituency, not a swing constituency, you have a large enough group within the party to influence the outcome of primaries. By influencing the outcome of primaries, you can influence candidate selection and party leadership. So there are advantages and disadvantages to being a swing constituency and of being a base constituency. But the left as a whole is not a swing constituency. It is a base constituency, so it doesn't win anything by staying home. Swing constituencies win by depriving parties of their votes. Base constituencies win by participating in party elections that determine party policy. That's my little bit on that. Now, Deidre asks, could this be similar to what is portrayed in the quote Handmaid's Tale? We've got a long way to go before we get to the Handmaid's Tale. And the Handmaid's Tale also takes place after a civil war. Now, is that future impossible? No, but I actually don't think that a civil war is going to go the way that radicals think it will, for many, many reasons. The first is that the United States Army is unlikely to take their side for a lot of reasons. There are certainly people in the Army who will take their sides, which is unfortunate, but the most populous and active states, well, the most populous states have the most people engaged in law enforcement and military affairs. And those states tend to be blue. California, New York, and Texas is like the big outlier. So if anything, the armed forces split half-half at the best for them, but unlikely. The second component is while there's a small percentage of people in those states which are yearning for that second civil war, who are ready to fight and have accumulated their guns and have prepared and trained for this civil war, the vast majority of those regions have diabetes and are obese. and are about to suffer terribly from coronavirus. As I sometimes say, and it's glib but true, they might have all the guns, but we have all the people who can walk. The other component to think about is just, it is so difficult, again, to capture and hold territory. The New York City police force, in and of itself, is tens of thousands of armed, trained officers who have very refined tactics of coordination, communication, and engagement. So it does not seem very likely that we end up in a civil war where the North really loses. Plus, I think there's some argument to be said that at least in the deeper territories of the North, Canada comes to our aid, and they have their own real military. So I don't think we're necessarily on the verge of the Handmaid's Tale unless it comes legally through the Supreme Court, and that's a whole other question. And we've had our debates about what the government can and cannot do under the Constitution, and ultimately, the reality is it's all political. It all comes down to the Supreme Court and what they want to do, because stare decisis, or what we would call precedent, is, I think, kind of out the window right now. Like, the Supreme Court just doesn't give a crap. They're like, well, this is what we want to do. We're going to find a way to do it. Deidre Levy, there are also many strains to this, so probably yes. I mean, there are people who want what happens in The Handmaid's Tale. I just don't think we're really going to get there. If we did the whole local thing on the left, Julianne asks, we have to, or Julian asks, yeah, if we did the whole local thing on the left, wouldn't we have to do the deep canvassing you were talking about? It would be ideal. Well, first off, deep canvassing is never a bad idea. Deep canvassing is just relationship building. But deep canvassing is particularly, or usually used to talk about outreach to the other side. And the left, being a base constituency, is not normally something that you would consider for deep canvassing. You would actually, ideally and in theory, have institutions for them to engage as effective partners in a joint project. This is, in theory, what the Democratic Party is supposed to be. It fails to be that. The Democratic Party, I don't want people to think that it's all like that's a panacea or it's operating properly. The Democratic Party fails daily to live up to its potential and to do the things it needs to do to build these coalitions and be a representative party for anything more than the people running it, which again feeds this elite cabal theory that so many people hold, because it really does feel that way to a lot of folks. So deep canvassing from, say, center Democrats to lefty Democrats, or left Democrats to center Democrats, I guess is kind of like an okay idea, but it takes a lot of time, and really we're living in close proximity to each other. It's not the ideal tactic. What we want to do is actually have people talking to their neighbors, again, because we're not going somewhere to canvass this. We want people talking to their neighbors on a regular basis. We want our county committee members and our district leaders and our precinct captains reaching out to the folks who live there to build consensus about what progressive politics and policies should be. But right now, the left is absolutely obsessed with fighting itself with, you've got your centrist Democrats, your economically progressive Democrats, your virtue signaling Democrats, and in all of these factions, there are bad actors. There are centrist Democrats who just really don't think that the rest of these people even deserve to have a voice because they've never done anything of substance with their life or their ideology. You've got your economically progressive Democrats who think that the capitalists and the centrist wing are absolutely evil and care for nothing except profits and are just part of a Republican right-wing cabal, but have infiltrated the Democratic Party. And then you've got your virtue signalers or your very socially concerned Democrats who, in their most problematic moments or amongst their most problematic people are constantly deciding that the other two wings are, racist, sexist, whatever it is, not doing enough to improve themselves and the dialogue, and are constantly trying to police people's language so that they can't express themselves. And that, by the way, actually, I was recently at a talk by somebody who wrote a book about the current state of the politics. And as it turns out, the only thing where the left does poorly in its messaging, the only time when young people are turned off by the left is when it comes to that virtue signaling, social normative component. And this is because people who are in the middle or who weren't raised in this form of social, I don't know what the word is, but who aren't familiar with these social norms, when they try to engage the left, they are quickly shut down as being wrong-headed, racist, sexist, misogynist, whatever it is, without being given an opportunity to grow or have that explained, right? For a long time, people tried to explain these things, and then suddenly there was a whole movement of, it's not my job to explain it to you, look it up. And effectively, people don't like that. And so the study that was done basically showed that the left wins the youth everywhere in everything, except in this sort of radical, not socialism, which is economic, but this radical social, I don't even want to call it progressivism or leftism. Like it's this virtue component of it. In any event, really what we need are the institutions that the party is supposed to be providing, and that life in a city or life in your community is supposed to be providing to bring people together. Deep canvassing is really something you're supposed to spend your energy doing to bridge divides in opposing constituencies, not your theoretical base. James King says, the quote, thought leaders in these movements have gotten way better at hiding their power level. They love using Asians as a foil by, quote, admitting that Asians are the only other group with higher IQs than them, and blacks are stronger and faster. Ah, yes. Yes. So these are the, he's going back to the thought leaders on the right, or the alt-right, as we were talking about before, and all these conspiracy theories. And yes, absolutely true. The new cool way to talk about racism is not to say that people are beneath you, but to say that every race has its own unique talent. And the Asians are very, very high IQ, smart, and have good at math. Black people are much stronger and bigger and faster than white people, but white people are the most creative. And they're the most creative and the most set to lead and come up with innovative ideas that improve things. Just like, Jesus Christ, people. But, that's the new hot way to talk about race on the alt-right, so that I'm not racist. Everybody has their own unique attributes. It's just that those attributes are delineated by race, and I happen to have the attributes that's most unique, useful, and in danger of going extinct if we let all the other races do what they want. So they must be corralled. James goes on, after all, how can they be followers of white supremacy, classic flavor, and also admit that whites aren't the best? Never mind that they then pivot to weird quasi-social arguments about how whites are innately more creative and better at modern warfare. No pun, because they all play Modern Warfare and love it. From there, it's just a hop, skip, and jump to arguing for traditional cultural, quote, homelands, which basically just resolve to ethnostates. So James and I are very much on the same page, and we both read the same studies. And to some extent, when we do because, it's one thing to read things. You really have to engage in these things. I suspect James, like me, also keeps a coterie of people with whom he's in contact who do not believe the same things as him, because sometimes it can be hard to really delineate or get to the root of how these people think without trying to hold the occasional conversation with one. In any event, when you dig, the rabbit hole goes deep. Julianne, not engaging is so privileged and whiny. I voted for Bernie in 2016 and supported Warren this year because we need more women in office. I supported her because she's the smartest, but everybody's got their reason. But I know we need to get rid of Trump. These Bernie or bust people are narrow-minded, to say the least. I don't know why they can't understand. I don't know why they can't understand these people can't get it. Please opine. Please opine. Isn't that what I've just been opining? And I don't know. Okay. So, yeah, I agree with you. Honestly, like, look, Biden has his major detractions, as I've said before. I'll also go on to say that the Democratic Party has its major detractions. I'll take it a step further and say that the policies being put forth by the Democratic Party rightly don't invigorate large swaths of the left. And I will make the final assertion that being against Trump is not good enough. That can't be the thing that we rely on to get voters out, even though Trump is terrible. Now, Joe Biden has a lot of baggage, but I think that you could stack up Joe and Donald and do a point-by-point comparison on their moral character, their history, and their policies while in office, and you would probably find that Joe ekes out ahead of Donald Trump. But then you could line up the cabinets they would likely assemble, and you'd find that the influences Biden keeps versus the influences that Trump keeps are significantly better. And I'm not here to say that the Democratic Party doesn't need to work on itself. It absolutely does, and I've been involved in that struggle for a good 10 years, and I'm constantly trying to get others involved in that struggle as well. But for all of its faults in how it conducts itself, the Democratic Party, I think, a much more transparent and democratic way than the Trump administration. And it would be an absolute disaster, for example, if going into the convention, the Democrats didn't allow Bernie to retain his delegates. Or it would have been even worse if Bernie had gone with a plurality of delegates and the convention on somebody else. But that is not going to happen, thank goodness. But the Democratic Party really needs to commit itself to the perception of democracy if it's going to claim to be fighting somebody because that person is undemocratic. It needs to exemplify the values it talks about. And right now, I think it's in a pretty good place to do that. It could definitely be better. It needs to do the convention well. And folks at the state level and local levels need to be deeply engaged, and we need to pass a couple of key resolutions in the sessions of the state committees that are upcoming. And listen, I don't necessarily think that's going to happen or we're going to get that far, but the folks who say that they will not vote for Trump, and this number is small, I believe, who will not vote for the Democrat because Bernie lost. You know, I don't think that that's really a good tack for the left to take, given this moment. My thinking really is that Bernie Sanders endorsed Joe Biden so quickly after he dropped out of the primary because he understands that if he doesn't, if the Democrats don't win this, all of his dreams and ideals and hopes for the future will go up in smoke because Trump represents an existential threat to leftism and progressivism that electing a bad Democrat just doesn't. And Bernie gets it. All right. Julianne, wait, that was the comment. James laughs, haha. Don't tell the socialist LARPers on Left Book they imagine themselves a whole other political species from the average Dem voter, despite the fact that ones who vote always vote like the rest of the base. And Julianne says, I grew up in the wrong state region. I really did. These people, I swear, if there is ever a division, highly unlikely, I will be in the north. I've said it before and I'll say it again. People in the... Oh, I lost it. People in the south are completely blinded by their religion. Religion glorifies unthinking devotion, even though they claim not to. This predisposition of accepting whatever is presented leads them to believe whatever is presented. We need to teach critical thinking and the importance of questioning, but then again, this would be attacked by the religious right because that doesn't help them. James Morris King. Sadly, I do in fact talk to a lot of these folks. Julianne, we need to scaffold their understanding of these concepts of the left. It takes time and understanding. It is educating. It takes time and understanding. It is educating people. I think the virtue signalers, at least some of them, don't actually care about drawing people in. I'm not even sure they care about their ideals. They care about the signal, which makes them look good. Some of them. I mean, many of them I know are very virtuous people who care deeply about these issues. But then you're doing the work. Like, if your work or contribution to the cause is calling out other people and not doing, 360-degree accountability or restorative justice or democratic reform in your institutions, then what are you doing? It is educating people. I think that the virtue signalers, at least some of them, don't actually care about drawing people in. It's about making themselves feel better. It is turned inward. I've known a lot of liberal white people who... Damn it. All right, forget this. Liberal white people who, in their anger toward the right on behalf of those who are marginalized as... All right, I don't really understand this. Anyway, calling them slacktivists, which, yes, was sort of what I was implying. James Morris King. Somehow my brain cells have held up against the relentless assault of stupidity from conversing with the conspiracy theorists. 4chan, Reddit, and worse places. 8chan, go check it out. No, don't do that. Julianne with the last piece, and then I got to run because I got to go to work. I just get snippets from people I know. When I have more time, I'll look it up more. It's out there. We need to know how to counter their arguments and educate them out of it. Every so often, you have that opportunity. In any event, I hope folks had fun. This was definitely amusing for me. And we'll do it again tomorrow on Sunday at 8:30. And then next week, we're going to have a Zoom so then we can have a real conversation. Anyway, thanks for stopping by.